Hello, everybody, and welcome to this awesome interview that we're having with Tanya DePass. Am I saying that right? Or is
Yep.
it? Okay. Um, again, I probably should have asked you that right before, but uh, it happens.
No
Um,
worries.
you are Cipher of Tier on Twitter. People have probably heard your name. It's you're one of those people that always seems to be around, like one of those people that everyone seems to know. And you are like the founder and director of I Need Diverse Games. You like work a lot with in the con circuit for gaming diversity. I know you work with Gamer X as a diversity liaison, and you're really involved in a lot of the gaming space. And so I just kind of wanted you to give you that opportunity to talk about that, and then we'll hop into some questions and talk about tabletop gaming and video games and diversity and feminism and all that good stuff.
Fun. Well, so I started I Need Diverse Games basically because I was mad about video games at 6 in the morning about 5 years ago. And I was just tired of seeing no people like me or very few people like me. And I started doing a few tweets and added I Need Diverse Games to the tweets. And a few people picked them up, and also a friend of mine, Mickey Kendall, knows Carnegie Online, retweeted me, and she has way more Twitter followers than I do. And we gained some traction and trended for a couple days, and the conversation didn't stop, surprisingly, even after it trended. And so I threw it out like, hey, do people want a community? Should I make a blog? So a Tumblr was born, its own Twitter was born, and the conversation was just right time, right place to keep going. And from there, it grew into its own nonprofit. We do the Diversity Lounge, we do a lot of other stuff, GDC, and it's been a weird, wild ride. Since then, I'm in a museum, and I just got to speak at the Smithsonian earlier this month. Yeah, earlier this month. I had to think about it for a second. Um, and
You're a busy person.
yeah. I just got back from Dublin, and I'm going to PAX next week as we record this. So, there's just a lot because the conversation around diversity shouldn't or could not, and should not stop. And I'm not the first or last person I'll talk about it. It was just a great lightning in a bottle moment, and luckily the conversation keeps going.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you kind of what made that such a lightning in the bottle moment that it has kind of. I mean, I don't feel like it's a stretch to say that like I Need Diverse Games has kind of kicked off a much wider conversation. And like you said, it's an ongoing conversation that hasn't really died down. And I guess what made that 6 a.m. decision like such a turning point for starting this conversation and perpetuating the conversation.
I think a lot of people are just tired of not seeing themselves represented. That was the same year that we had that's too hard to animate women. We
Oh gosh,
had,
yeah.
yeah, and like the weirdness with the other title where people's faces were inside out. And just, it was over and over a lot of the same, same brown haired, blue eyed protagonist dude saves the girl, saves the universe, assuming that the female love interest lives long enough through the game and isn't fridged for a plot. And I just got tired of it. We had Nilin
Mm-hmm.
and Remember Me. Over the years, we've gotten slightly better, but I think everyone was kind of hitting a point of it'd be great to see someone like me. It'd be great to not have the same hero's journey, heroine's journey over and over and over. You know,
Yeah.
Good storytelling is it seems to be hard to come by. And unfortunately, there's been a decline in a lot of single player games a lot of us love. Mass Effect, Dragon Age. We're not getting a lot of games like that where I could drop easily 100, 200 hours in it. And even then, I still can't make a character that looks just like me. I can't make a character that, I can imagine myself existing in these worlds.
Yeah. I so like that's clearly like that's clearly been like this long persistent problem, but I guess what what has prevented that in the past from becoming like a wider conversation as opposed to now, where like things you point out are changing, albeit much more slowly than a lot of us would like. Um, so what, I guess, what was different when you kicked off the conversation? Is it just that there are a lot more people who are, I guess, maybe savvy to the language of games, where they're able to critique them now in a more uh, a deeper way, or is it voices have now been given platforms that they didn't previously have? Like what's your take on all of that?
I don't know if it's so much better critique, because I mean we've seen some terrible takes on video games even in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's seeing other people have the discussion, giving other people the ability and strength to talk about it as well, even though knowing that you're going to possibly deal with harassment and stalking and everything else. And some people feel like, you know what? I know what could come. I'm still going to talk about these issues. Because it just felt a lot of people hit that point that maybe I did with, it would be great if we could see more brown people, we could see more openly queer people, not the queer baiting BS that we've gotten, um, and have a better dialogue. And I think more people that are making the games are able to have the conversations, but we also still see the terrible, terrible things that happen when you try to have the conversation. Um, what was Apex Legends devs got harassed and were calling people, I think, assholes in their forums because people didn't seem to understand that games don't make themselves.
Right.
Um, the Ooblets devs that, were having death threats and all this other stuff happen.
Oh yeah.
So I think people are ready for a better conversation, but not everyone's equipped to. And the very vocal minority are the ones that drove the conversation for a long time, unfortunately.
Right.
And now more and more of us, I think especially just strength in numbers, are seeing people have the conversations, having it not necessarily turn into a trash fire, or having better tools to just block these people, move on, and still have our conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Like more people are getting equipped to better deal with these sorts of conversations, even if it's at a very slow pace.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I wanted to ask, because you tend to talk about a lot of, you know, obviously diversity. I need diverse games, but
Mm-hmm.
also like uh, feminism and how that relates to games and fandoms, and also how all of that relates to racial issues. And I guess I was curious to hear your response. Like, are these all separate issues to you, or do you view them as like a cohesive worldview? Like, what's, I guess, kind of what is that?
They're not separate because, I can't decide today I'm going to present as female. Well, I mean, I could, but, I can't compartmentalize my identity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's intersectional. So if I play a game and it's terrible to me because it's misogynistic or fridges all the women, something like that. That's one part of it that I can critique and look at, but I can't ignore racial aspects or lack of race in a game. And I don't know, oh my god, everything must be black. But you made this game, especially if it's a future game or even if it's medieval, that there are no brown people at all, and
Mm-hmm.
ignoring that. So looking at an intersectional worldview, I think, is required. You can't compartmentalize the ways in which you look at games, the ways in which you look at any media, honestly. And I know people always want to go, oh, you're making it a race issue. You're making it about women, this SJW agenda. And it's like, well, if the agenda is for me to be recognized and treated like I exist, especially in a game that posits a future world, why don't I get to exist too? And
Right.
same, right, and the same with like queer folks, trans folks. All these games still remain a very sterile very look, only the white dudes survived kind of landscape. So what does that tell me? That you don't think people like me get to exist now, let alone in the future? You can't compartmentalize your discourse or your discussion or your critique of a game.
So for people who might not necessarily be familiar with words like intersectional or fridging, like what do those terms mean?
So fridging is when you kill a female character for a plot. Because I can't remember the name of the movie. There's a movie where they actually put someone in a refrigerator, and
Hmm.
that's where the term came from. And then intersectionality is looking at all facets of what makes you you. So I am cisgender, I'm female, I'm American black person, bisexual. So all of those parts of my identity make up the whole, and I can't ignore or decide today is the day that I'm going to go out and be like the blackest person ever. I mean, I could, but for sake of what we're defining,
Yeah.
like not ignoring any part of yourself and looking at how those intersect to make up the whole person.
Yeah, it's kind of maybe like a coordinate map. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you have all these different axes on which you exist, and intersectionality is kind of recognizing where you fall on that coordinate grid, I guess.
Yeah.
If you need to visualize it that way. Um, and so I guess how like you've clearly made gaming kind of your main focus. Like, so what is it about gaming that like in particular that you feel the need to kind of spread the word about diversity, as opposed to like other mediums, because clearly like diversity and like the need for more creative voices at the table, like it's not just limited to games, but is there something special or unique to gaming that you feel um, merits your attention
Um,
more?
it's hard because every part of it, who's getting showcased as, let's say, a Twitch streamer?
Mm-hmm.
Who do we get to see on stage at E3? There are diverse teams making the games, but we don't get to see that a lot of time. We just see the same scruffy, bitter white dudes on stage at E3, with the exception of like maybe the one or two people of color they trot out every year. But it's also realizing that having a character outside of the quote unquote expected norm isn't weird, it's not strange, it's not pushing an agenda, it's reflecting the people playing these games. And realizing that the demographic and the who you should be aiming at is not 1835-year-old white dudes anymore. And there's stats to bear this out. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just me. It's not just me saying, "Ooh, white men are evil," because that's what some people take out of what I say and do.
Which,
Um,
to clarify, is not what you're saying.
right. I never. It's interesting, and to diverge a little bit. I know what I've said is like I would like more people like me to be present in games, to see people on stage at events, things like that. And somehow people hear you're destroying the artist's vision. You must clearly hate white people. I'm like, that's nowhere near what I said, but okay, run with that. Um, but it needs to be across the board. It needs to be who's making games. It needs to be who we see on stage, and especially people at like the decision making level, because a lot of times you may get ideas that are diverse or inclusive, and the team is inclusive, but the person signing off isn't, or they're not on board with it, or they pull the we don't know if this will make money, and change something. Because I think what's the Overwatch character, Ash, her
Oh
initial
yeah,
design, she was a black woman, and they
that's
changed it.
right. Yep.
So something like people clearly want this. They want a black female character. What is the problem? So, things like that where it's like whoever made that decision to change it, that would be the roadblock there. So it's at all levels.
Yeah. Stepping away a bit from video games specifically and moving more towards tabletop gaming.
Hmm.
Um, I guess as maybe like a fun palate cleanser question, your Twitter handle is Cipher of Tier. Like, where did
Hmm.
that come from? Seems like there might be a story behind it.
Um, Not so much a story, but so a lot of people when they see tier, they think either um I must either be talking about the D&D deity um or Warcraft, I think, has a tier in
Hmm.
it. Because I've played like maybe 2 hours of Warcraft in my whole life, and I know the hate will come and people telling me I need to play. Actually, I follow the Nordic path, the Nordic pantheon, and
Okay.
Tyr is the god of justice.
Oh, that's cool.
And
I'm sorry, I assumed.
it's okay. A lot of people either they think they just go with, oh well, you play D&D, it must be a D&D reference. I was like, no, because the internet wasn't around when I started playing D&D. But yeah, so that is the Nordic deity I have a personal relationship with, and so I've always liked it. And when I was trying to think of a better screen name than the terrible ones I had at like 18, 19, and 20, I I was thinking about Scion of Tyr, but I thought that was a little too pretentious. And so I went with Cypher of Tyr and just ran with it and it worked.
Hmm. Well, so you do also have like a notable presence in tabletop gaming. Like some people listening or reading might recognize you from Rivals of Waterdeep, which is a
Hmm.
live play podcast tabletop game that you participate in as the human paladin Celise.
Yes.
Um, so I guess we kind of touched on this, but like, what is your background in tabletop role playing?
I'm one of those old nerds that had to deal with the Satanic Panic back in the day. I've come and gone with tabletop. I played for a while, got away from it like after 3.5, came back to it actually just a couple of years ago. So Greg Tito had me on Dragon Talk, which is the D&D podcast, and we talked about it in like, just about inclusion. He's always been a follower of what I do, and we became friends. And a little while after Dragon Talk, he reached out and said, "Hey, I'm putting together a show. Would you be interested? And do you know other people?" And the whole idea, and it wasn't like Wizards went and said, "We're gonna make this like black version of Critical Role or some other show." It was, we want to show everyone can learn to play, so everyone's at different experience levels.
Hmm.
Everyone is some people had never played before our show premiered last year at D&D Live, and some of us have been playing a long time or doing improv or doing other things. So we're all at different experience levels when it comes to D&D and RPG. And I played other stuff when I studied abroad, God, 18 years ago now. We actually ran a game of Big Eyes Small Mouth while I was overseas. I played a few games of Underground. I've done a little bit of Blue Rose and Dragon Age RPG as well.
Okay. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you about that is that often a lot of tabletop games have certain assumptions about race or gender that are or even sexuality that are baked into the game lore or the system itself. And I guess how do you deal with a construction that might be problematic if you run across it in a game?
Well, as a player, I try to go, hey, that's not okay, and that's why session zero is incredibly, incredibly important. For those listening, don't know what a session zero is. It means before you ever actually like start the game, you sit down and go, here are things that'll bother me, here are things that are not okay. So like, you know, let's say, and I am actually arachnophobic, so could we not run across giant spiders in this? And granted, yes, the tabletop game is theater of the mind, but just for the safety of the player and something that makes them comfortable, or if someone, let's say, is an assault survivor, because a lot of male DMs unfortunately have the habit of, there's a woman at the table, I'm going to put assault in their backstory, or try to force them into a relationship, or as a friend said, the reason they stopped playing tabletop for a long time, a male DM decided that their character was going to be assaulted and impregnated against their will, did not discuss it.
Oh.
Yeah, and too many women and femme presenting folks have that story of male DMs doing stuff like that. And so that is when you can sit down with the X card and it's like, there's a difference between dude assumes this and throws in the game, doesn't talk to you, versus here's something I want to have for my character's backstory if it comes up. at a certain point, I mean, you either need to fade to black or use a veil, as some people say. So, like, if there's things they're not comfortable with, or maybe it gets a little past what they're cool with, they can say, okay, and we're using a veil or a next card, and you can tap out.
Hmm.
Um, and as a GM, the book is there as a guidebook, so your player's handbook is there as a guide. It is not a set in stone. You must literally follow every single rule that as written, or else you're a bad player. I just run with it as I'm a very loose GM, and I try to just keep in mind again, who am I playing with? What's the setting? And I'm gonna hopefully do a game at Geek GirlCon, and I'm gonna do things like subvert the tropes of orcs, and they're gonna be smart and amazing, and courtesans and philosophers. And the things you can do is just subvert the tropes. If you have drow in the game, for instance, they don't need to be coal black. They don't need to be chaotic evil, things like that.
Hmm.
Um, it's up to the DM to create that, and especially if you're doing homebrew, and even if you're running a pre-made module, you can always edit the text. You can do things for flavor. You can make it as comfortable as possible, and you can do things like, I don't like this whole sub race, and I don't like what this is. I'm just gonna swap it out and do something different.
Yeah. Um, so I guess what I I know that I kind of just asked a question that was in a similar vein, but um, clearly you found that you've had to make some of those changes, push back on some of the ideas that you've encountered in tabletop games. Um, and do you have any like specific examples? I know you just gave a couple, but you've been around tabletop gaming for a long time, so you
Mm-hmm.
have seen a lot of modules come out, maybe not necessarily for D&D, but for other games, and maybe also for D&D, uh, that try and tackle like cultures inspired by Japan or Asian cultures as like this weird kind of a monolithic conception of that in a fantasy setting. Um, like I guess how do you deal with this is kind of hard to describe, especially if people listening aren't people who play tabletop games, but there's kind of like this weird two-tiered system, where the developers write the books, but then the DMs or GMs run the games, and so there's a lot of opportunity for different biases to make it through into a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, have there been times where you've had to like put your foot down and say like, I'm not comfortable running this entire module, let's do something else? Or I I guess I feel like you
Um,
understand what I'm asking,
yeah, I'm
even
just
if I'm
trying to
kind
think
of
of
bumbling.
a good experience, or not good experience, but something I could share. Um, so I was a guest at OrcaCon now 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago, I think. And I did a panel, and it was about, we were talking, I forget what we were talking about, but I brought up the drow, and like the drow were like a specific like bugbear for me. I just really hate them.
Hmm.
Um, and someone in the room thought they were going to be funny to ask about what's the pronunciation of drow, and then I've encountered other people that just don't get why they bother me so much. And
Hmm.
it's not, and it's, yes, it's how the books have described them, and they're chaotic evil all the time, etc., etc. But it's the literal, it's the, I'm trying to think of words that are also just not all cussing. Um,
I appreciate it.
it's the way that the drow are literally black in most like depictions of them,
Hmm.
and how black is then tied to being evil and chaotic evil and not goodness. It falls in that trope of non-humans as bad.
Right.
And there hasn't been a lot because I guess I've been lucky in some ways to have mostly good groups. But one thing that actually happened on Rivals, and it wasn't even about race or anything else. It was more about dynamic of something that bothered me after the fact. Like, it bothered me in the moment, but after I sat with it, it really bugged me. One of our players was being enthralled, and
Okay.
as such, he basically did persuasion on us and tried to get us to do stuff. My character had been missing because I was traveling and not there the week before. Um, he basically got her to do an action, and character wasn't happy. I wasn't happy about it, and the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me that the mic autonomy in that moment for the character was taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about it later, and that was one of those instances where we have to sit down and go, okay, well, this still bothers me. Here's a barrier for me. Here's a line in the sand.
Okay.
Um, but it's one of those things where you may not know it's a line in the sand until it happens. Because I'm like, okay, like in a video game, I don't know that I would have had that same reaction. Because in a video game, you don't have the opportunity to talk back to the character that does this to you.
Yeah.
But as people that are playing this and talk after the game and in the week in between, it's hard to know what will be an issue. And I actually did a panel last PAX Unplugged or PAX East because I go to so many conventions, it's blurring together.
Yeah.
But we talked about, like, is it really playing a role? Dr. Rafael Bocamatzo, who is the clinical director of Take This, did a panel, and we talked about kind of the ways our lives influence the characters we play. And I brought up the point of male DMs bringing assault into it as a casual storyline thing. And someone came up to me after that panel and tried to explain how it wasn't really a thing, and that Super Mario Brothers also was yeah, the face you're making was probably the face I made in that moment.
That
And they tried
sounds
to
so uncomfortable.
it was incredibly uncomfortable, and
Oh.
thankfully the mics were not still on, because I know I was like, the are you talking about? Because it was just like, what? Because he tried to explain to me how it was a thing, and this makes sense, and I was like, I don't have enough time to talk to you right now. But so weird things like that where people get stuck, I think, on it's a game. For them, it's always just a game. They never have to think about representation. And, there's some people who get real deep into their video games, RPGs, and, like, something happens to them, their character dies. It's like someone died in real life for them. And I just felt in that moment this dude was, like, way too invested in trying to rationalize these terrible things that people do at the table. But it also made us think about things that we do at the table that we don't really connect to our own selves that we're putting into these characters a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. That is just such an awful story. But what is the disconnect there? Because you've mentioned a couple times now that, like, male DMs will bring up assault, for example. Like, are there other blind spots that you've noticed people kind of bringing up either as players or DMs over the years?
Absolutely. There'll be people who God, there's so many examples I could think of. People who will say, let's say you want to make your character queer. Either
Mm-hmm.
you're queer or this is something you want to kind of role play through. And people go, why do you have to do that? Why do you have to make this character like this? And it's like, well, because real people are queer? Why is this such a thing? Or the people, like, we've gotten a lot of pushback because all of our characters are people of color on Rivals. And so we'll talk about representation, or I'll retweet people, and one of our players, Brandon Stennis, his character, he's a high elf, and the art of him is he is brown, he's dark skinned. And he talked about this on Twitter, and the immediate response was, so your elf was a drow. It's like, no. Because he said, I play black elf, and he's like, black elf does not equal drow. And so those are the kind of things where, like, come on, y'all, this is 2019, why do we keep having to have these discussions? And, things like that, or where you want to go, well, I'm a human, and if you say the human is black, then people want to assign real world racist tropes to the campaign. It's like, I am at the table to escape this stuff. You don't need to put it in there.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming, well, your character's black, it's like, but we're in a setting with dragons and elves and orcs.
Right. Why is being black almost more fantastical or unexpected than any of those things?
Exactly. And it's just, wow. Because, excuse me, because a lot of people seem to think that if this is what you do, if you make your character black, then you must have all of these things added in. That it's not the same. It's like they can't. It's like they want their cake and eat it too. They want to have this fantasy realm, and they want to run around, they want to do whatever. But then it's like they can't plop down a person of color, they can't plop down a queer person without interjecting modern day things that they think would affect them.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be the same ones that go, but games aren't political, it's just a game, why are you doing this? It's like, you literally can't do these two things at the same time. You're creating cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. I guess so. What are some things that, like, say you're a DM or a player who's listening? What are some things that they can do to try and avoid falling into unintentionally problematic tropes or scenarios? Does it really just come down to having that session zero and having everyone involved draw out their lines or what they think their lines are, or is there more to it?
I think it's a little bit of both. Is that, DMs need to know what everyone's points are as well as they can. They need to know, like, what's okay, what's not okay, and they also need to think about, if I've got a hopefully inclusive group at my table, am I doing things like unintentionally putting racism in the game? Am I doing things like overlaying the way someone will respond, let's say a dwarf or a high elf or a drow, onto this person who's playing, versus the setting and this is what's happening? And there's been great conversations happening lately about not using race as we should be using species, with a lot of people, because D&D has called everything a race, when really, like, there's
Right.
how many different versions of elves, how many different versions of dwarves and orcs. So people need to be cognizant of who's at the table, and then if they're cognizant of who's not at the table, if they've got a very homogenous group, is if someone comes in and goes, well, I want my character to be black, I want my character to be queer, and that's not their identity, ask them, why they want to do it, and don't be afraid to ask, because if you don't ask, then it's going to be a bad time at the table. And remember that identity is not a costume. It's not something you can easily try on and try off, or try on and take off. Because for someone who may be questioning, exploring, trying to figure out who they are, that's one thing. But there are a lot of people who want to go, I want to play this character just at the table, and when I'm done, when we don't have that luxury. I don't have the luxury of changing my skin color when I step away from the table, or when I stop playing a video game, or what have you. And I think that's the main thing, is interrogating the reasons why someone wants to, and not force someone to come out, not force someone to go beyond what's comfortable, but if someone just basically wants to play with identity as a costume, interrogate why, and don't be afraid to tell them no. Don't be afraid to say, hey, that's not okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot, like, depending on the group, depending on the DM, the experience of tabletop role playing can vary widely, to say the least. So I guess it's good you should be having these conversations with every group that you play with, right? Like, are there times you don't need to have these conversations, or is it literally every single game?
Every single game, because the one exception, and this is hard because if you're at a convention you're maybe sitting with these people 2, 4, 6, 8 hours.
Hmm.
And I'd say for a longer game, even try to do that. Or if you know who's running the game, you can contact them before the convention. Maybe go, hey, I've signed up for your game. Is there anything I should know or not know? If that's possible, it's not always possible because you could just sit down at a table randomly at a con. But session 0 is absolutely mandatory every time. And, also check in. Like after every episode of Rivals, we chat. We either go and eat or we just sit and talk for a little bit. We have a Slack where we talk to each other. Communication is key.
Hmm.
And that shouldn't be a one and done thing. You should always check in, especially if you wind up in a very long running game. After 6 months, things change, people change, life happens. And make sure everyone's still cool with what's going on, or is there something they want to do different? And if someone's uncomfortable, you don't want a situation where a player's uncomfortable, or even you're uncomfortable as a GM, and and you feel like you can't talk to each other. That is a recipe for disaster, for emotional bleed over at the table, because people are not talking, they're letting whatever feelings fester, and it will come out and play, and that's not healthy
Right.
or good for anyone.
Yeah, because at its heart, tabletop role playing is a social experience, right? So communication is really key to all
Hmm.
of that. So I know we talked a little bit about game developers kind of in a video game sense, but
Hmm.
have you had a lot of experience talking with tabletop developers in the industry?
A little bit. I've had a chance to do some consulting, unfortunately most of which is under NDA.
Uh,
But I have had a chance, like people have come to me and said, "Hey, can you look at this? Can you review this?" Or we're making updates to our game. We want to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes over and over. And a lot of people seem to be willing to listen, but I found way more people resistant in tabletop.
really?
Oh yeah, the old grognards that are just like, oh, well, this is how we played back in my day, and it's just a game, and blah blah blah. Or the people that, like certain other factions in the video game side of things, are readily easy to go. People are so offended. You're a snowflake. This SJW agenda. It's just a game. And it's like that seems to be the refrain over and over. And especially people that are mad that like the iconic human in D&D Fifth Edition is a black woman. But yet we've also got books where it's like race is not handled very well by the same
Right.
people. So the people that just can't hear any criticism, don't want any criticism because you're ruining their fun. Um, but
is
they
is that is that is that where their feelings come from? Like I guess where do you see this coming from? Like inside. I mean, I guess to a certain extent, I'm asking you to like speculate because who knows
um
what goes on inside anybody. But
well, my speculation, and this has been my speculation on the video game side as well, is that a lot of us as nerds, as gamers, what have you, have felt persecuted, shunned, etc. for liking video games, for liking tabletop. Like people remember having to go play D&D literally in secret in someone's basement.
yeah,
Yes, but those dark days are gone now. You can go play in the light and go to your game store. No one's going to shame you. We have luxury dice and gaming tables now. I treat it as if they feel threatened and feel like what was their domain, quote unquote, is now threatened by the very people who made fun of them. They're feeling like the eminent domain of the nerd or what have you is now being to them invaded instead of seeing and realizing that people like me, people like you have always been there.
hmm
We've never it's not like we've suddenly found D&D. And one thing that irks me to no end is that people go, "Oh, well you only like D&D because of Critical Role or what have you." And it's like, "No, I've been playing D&D since before some of those people were alive." Um and that's the easy dismissal of it because they want to go, "Oh, well, you're fake. You're a fake fan. You don't really know." It's like, no, I can show you my old dice. I can show you all the stuff, but I shouldn't have to. So,
right.
so they feel like their domain is being threatened by all these newcomers instead of going, "Oh, cool, more people like this hobby. they want to hoard it all themselves. Like in unfortunately, Dragon's the best thing I can come up with, and they make it hard slash almost impossible to go up and talk to someone at a con or something like that, or even have conversations on Twitter, because they're feeling so pushed out when they shouldn't. They should be throwing the doors wide open. And glad more people are finding D&D and other tabletop games.
Right. And so this attitude also applies to like people working on the games themselves?
Oh, no, I think the people working on, well, I shouldn't say that. The people I've had the fortune to work with have been great.
Okay.
And then, there are people who are always going to argue and, not want to put people of color in their games. They're not going to want to put anyone in their games that is not a white dude that looks like Gandalf or the stereotypical blonde hero savior. Those are the people, but they're not the ones interacting with us online. They're not the ones watching shows like Critical Role. They're the ones that hate it because they feel like it's ruined their hobby, and you have all these fake people, which is BS. That's the hard part. Those are people that you're not going to please. You're never going to get them to think about it that way. And so for
Right.
those people, I'm not worried about them. If they want to sit in a dark corner and still roll dice and act like it's the Stone Age of D&D, let them go suffer.
So I guess for the people, like obviously you're under NDA, but for developers who are looking to create games that are more representative or less exploitative,
Mm-hmm.
is it as simple as hiring more people with diverse backgrounds or bringing in like someone like you, a diversity consultant? Or is there something more to kind of this process of making make helping them make games that are very clearly for everyone?
It's both. They, as much as I love D&D, it's a very white office over there in Seattle. Same with Green Ronin, which is why I'm really glad they brought me on to work on the RPG based on N.K. Jemisin's books. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm super excited. So many emails to read. Um, but there are, it's both. If you're a studio and you're not positioned to just flat out hire people,
Mhm.
or bring on freelancers, then definitely get diversity consultants, because it's better to do that up front and go, hey, this is where we failed, because you're not going to notice what you're doing wrong because you don't have the cultural context. So something as simple as, I'm trying to think of something that's obvious, but maybe not obvious to someone who's never had the context. Maybe like some slang that you want to have a character use,
Mhm.
where to you may not seem that bad, but then it turns out, oh, this is actually kind of bad. It's like a racial slur for someone. There are things I learned, like a word I grew up using was a slur for Romani folks.
Oh, yep.
So things like that. That was something I had to learn. So finding consultants, but the better part of that is diversifying your writing and your RPG development staff. But if you're not positioned to bring on people full time, get freelancers and then also get consultants. Because even if you get more freelancers that are diverse, they still may not be able to tackle, let's say, you want to have a trans character. If
Right.
someone may be in the office, but maybe they're not comfortable being out yet. So you should do your diligence first, and when you can hire people, bring on more people not like you.
This kind of rolls into, I think when the people who play the games, when they see companies bring in diversity consultants or trying to beef up their team with people who have all these different backgrounds, um, and then they say, "Well, you're just this is tokenism," or like you're like you said earlier, like the SJWs are ruining gaming or
Hmm.
whatever. Like what is your response to that?
I would love to just like laugh at them and go about my day, but the sad thing is those the very loud people
Mm-hmm.
that won't stop talking about it and want to feel oppressed even though they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I something they need to get with the times. The D&D that they grew up with is not the old version they started playing with, because this is going to sound terrible, but a lot of the people I find resistance with either skew younger that have spent a lot of their times all on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
or people older than me even that they grew up a certain way, and they remember when they couldn't openly play D&D and they couldn't do that without being harassed and called nerd or whatever, and that stuck with them and formed a lot of things. And now I feel like there's almost a resentment of,
Mm-hmm.
you get to go enjoy this nerddom publicly, like you can go to Target and buy the D&D Essentials kit. I didn't grow up with that. So
Right.
I could see how it's very easy to turn to get some internalized anger over that.
Yeah.
But for anyone who wants to gatekeep and call it an SJW agenda, that's on them. They need to figure it out. And they're going to get left behind. They're going to be the ones that are, still having their conventions that are 4 days of people in a room, not bathing and rolling dice and feeling like this is the good life.
um, and I guess I had lost a little bit of my train of thought with the previous question, but also, like, it's easy for these people to see, like, these business decisions, like hiring people who are more diverse or bringing in diversity consultants, as like changing the original vision.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess, like, to a certain extent, it is changing the vision, at least as it is internal to the development process. Um, but what's something that you can kind of say as a rebuttal to that?
It's never about changing the artist's vision. It's about helping them not be a terrible human. 'Cause I actually got that pushback at a MagFest panel this year. I forget the exact panel we were doing, but someone's like, "Why aren't you ruining the artist's vision?" Because we were talking about trigger warnings and content warnings, and with the idea of informed consent. So let's say something's a trigger for me,
Mm-hmm.
and developers are never going to know. It's a global game,
Right.
global industry. But if I have the option to go, the scene can fade to black, I don't need to know that. Not lose the context of the game, not change the game. Because I think people hear that and they go, you're trying to ruin the game. You're trying to force these people to make your characters all like a gay, black, disabled character, or a trans Latina with mental health issues, which both actually describe people I know. And it's like they
Mm-hmm.
just can't, they think of these outlandish things and think no one can actually be this way, when actually there are plenty of people that way. Um, and so my rebuttal is, you just need to get out more, get out from behind the screen, get out of the basement, which sounds kind of, I don't know, I was going to say sarcastic or dismissive, but it makes me wonder where these people have been that they have not met anyone else unlike themselves. So the world is bigger than you thought it is, and you need to get out from behind your screen.
Yeah. So I guess we're kind of nearing a wrap up point, but one of the last things I wanted to ask you is if you have one central message that you want either players or developers to walk away from after having listened to one of your talks or gone through a session, a professional session with you, like what is your central message? I mean, I feel like it's kind of in the title of I Need Diverse Games, but like what is that thing?
Um, oh, that's rough. Because
Sorry.
I don't know, I don't want to sound trite. That games are not the eminent domain of the gamer bro anymore. That you need to remember, I need to realize, and I remember that everyone can play games and that you should welcome them. Gatekeeping is just going to destroy our hobby, be it tabletop, be it video games. Um, that you just make yourself look like a fossil by gatekeeping, and fossils wind up in museums. That's not where we want gaming to be.
Yeah, we want gaming to be fun, and like what's more fun than getting everyone involved, really?
Right?
Well, thank you so much for your time. I didn't actually plan on this conversation lasting about an hour, but it was really fun and interesting talking to you. And I know you're super tired and you have a lot going on. So thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time to talk with me and answer questions. Um, I guess before we 100% wrap up, I know you have involvement in Extra Life. Is there anything you want to shout out that's coming up, or like maybe not necessarily related to Extra Life, but plugs for shows?
Well, I'll be at PAX West next week. I'm actually on a panel with Lou about fundraising.
Awesome.
So that's Friday at noon at PAX West. And then I will be at TwitchCon. I'm just doing one panel. So, doing TwitchCon, I'm doing a week in LA for the Civic Media Fellowship that I'm doing. And then I'm doing a 1 hour talk at Pixel Pop Festival in St. Louis, September 14th.
Just for my edification, what is a civic fellowship?
Uh,
Like, what does
so,
that imply?
so USC, Annenberg Labs does a Civic Media Fellowship, and we are the second cohort. So there are 6 remote fellows and 6 residential. So we're all talking about the work we do in media, and also how that can tie to civic engagement.
Okay.
So I'll throw a link in. I almost said in the chat because I'm so used to streaming. I'll just send you links for that. But yeah,
Yeah.
the fellowship started August 20th, and then we're going till next May. So basically, an academic calendar.
Okay.
So yeah, it's
Awesome.
a bunch of people doing a bunch of different projects, and also bringing our current work and skills into it and seeing what we can produce.
Well, awesome. Where can people find you? Where can people kind of keep up to date with what you're doing? All that good stuff.
Probably the easiest way is Twitter, and my handle everywhere is CypherTier, CYPHER, and usually with things like PAX, I put my panel schedule up on my site. And then I occasionally stream when I'm actually home on Twitch, and same username. So yeah, pretty much same username everywhere: Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, Twitch.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And I feel like it was a really good conversation that people will get a lot out of. So
It was
thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.